Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another live streaming of basic transfer pricing. Tonight is July 12, no? So July 12, 2021. I would like to say thank you po sa ating mga subscribers. Umabot na tayo ng 1,140 subscribers. So thank you very much. And our topic for tonight is about the interest and guarantee fees associated with debt. No? Utang, and also understatement of income tax liability and increased interest. Of course, that's the usual topics in transfer pricing. And our case is about the medieval attractions NV versus Commissioner of Internal Revenue. This is in US, and this is part 2 because we have discussed already part 1 last Wednesday, no? Last Wednesday, that was July 7. So, part 1 in the case of medieval attractions NV. Okay, shout out, Harry.
Shoutout po kay Ma'am Rosalina Tune.
Okay.
Maayong gabi daw from Cebu.
Mayang gabi sa taga Cebu. Okay.
Siya pa lang po, ma'am.
Okay, ilan yung ating viewers?
6 po. 6
Okay, so good evening po sa ating 6 viewers, and thank you very much for watching. And let's continue with our discussions on the interest and guarantee fees associated with debts. Why interest? Because this interest payment for the cost of money, what is required when we say transfer pricing, it is required that the transactions between related parties when it comes to payment of interest should be arm's length. And what we mean by arm's length, we mean that the interest rate of loan or debt between the related parties should be similar or at par or at parity with that of the independent parties or what is prevailing in the market. Just like here in the Philippines, the rate, or we can benchmark the rate of interest is that of 12% per annum, the legal rate of interest. Aside from the central bank rate, which is fluctuating, no, it always changes. But the legal rate of interest is 12%. No? So interest is a very, very important transactions, financial transactions in companies making or doing business. Why? Because the cost of money used in business are always present in any transactions. That's why the payment of interest is usually having a transfer pricing issues because the huge interest are sometimes due to artificial price management, no? And guarantee fees, no? So these guarantee fees should also be arm's length because when one related company is being guaranteed by another related party to obtain loan, then that related party who is acquiring or applying for a loan paid guarantee fees to the company who is a co-maker or guarantor in their loans. No? But as transfer pricing requires, the guarantee fees between the related parties should also be at par with that of the independent parties. And our next, another topic is the understatement of income tax liability and increased interest. Of course, when you increase your interest expense, you decrease or you understate your income tax liability. So why? Because especially if the company is such that it is capital intensive, then the payment of interest to loans are huge, and therefore if these interest expenses are overstated, naturally the effect is understatement of income. So when the income is understated, the tax payment, the income tax is also understated. Okay, so let's continue with our discussion on part 2 on the case of medieval attractions NV versus the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. In there, expansion of their operations in the US. And right now, this medieval times, because the case is in 1987, so that was more than 20 years ago. So right now, there are so many branches of medieval times in the US. No, what is this medieval attractions? The business of these medieval attractions are um, theater type, dining, uh, just like restaurant, no? But they have a very sophisticated shows, live shows of this horseback riders, jousting, yung uh, anuhan ng uh, parang nagtutusukan ng bakal, no? Yung mahaba. It really requires strength between the players, and it's very dangerous play. And imagine that you are dining at the same time you are watching the live show, no? These are the games of the royal families, no? Kaya nga medieval times. And the horseback riders are, the knights are very, very uh, um, are doing their shows well because they are well trained, no? And they have this 250 acres of runs wherein they race their horses, no? Because they have the live horses playing on their theater, the live show, no? To entertain their uh, customers, no? So this is a very expensive dining, no? The dinner theater with actual shoes of knights or horseback riders doing their games, no? And then fighting. Sometimes there are tournaments. And these are participated by almost royal families, no? Because the tickets are very expensive. Okay. So in this case, the discussions that we have last time in part one, in this case of medieval attractions, we discussed about the reasonableness of the payments for management and consulting fees because they charge too much for management and consulting fees. And also the bona fide payment of royalty for franchise transactions. So the rate are being questioned because when we pay royalty payments, especially if it is between related parties, then we have to see to it also that the payment for royalty is arm's length or it is the same with those of independent parties. Okay. So let's continue with our case of medieval transactions. This is part 2 already versus the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. No, this is a U.S. case. Okay, and the assessment here is for the year 1987, no? 1988 and 1989. Okay. Dali lang, bakit nawala? Ito. 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 111. Okay. So, we start with the interest expense guarantee fees resulting from lump sum franchise payments because the medieval times, this is the name of their restaurant, expanded in Florida, and then in California, and then in many parts of the US. No? So, dumami na sila because it is, the business is very profitable and it is participated or run by shareholders who are very experienced businessmen, no? And they are also very rich, belongs to the royal family. Patayin mo na, Hari. Okay. So the interest expense and the guarantee fees resulting from lump sum franchise payment. In this case, the medieval times or these medieval attractions has established many companies, no? So they have companies for the catering, they have companies for the royalty, the IP company, they have in different uh, purposes, no? With the different purposes, they establish corporations. So they have so many corporations. So petitioners deducted amounts as interest and guarantee fees in connection with the promissory notes and the lump sum royalty payments to Manver. So Manver is one of the owner of the medieval times. No? Petitioners argue that there were business reasons for the financing arrangements, that the debt was bona fide, and that the economic substance sought by the parties was accomplished. Why? Because when you will be subjected to a transfer pricing audit, then the question that will be asked by the examiner is this a bona fide, is there a bona fide debt so that you are allowed to pay interest? No? And whether there is an economic substance sought by the party, no? May economic substance ba yung transactions na yan? Bakit utang ka ng utang, marami ka namang pera, no? But in this case, they obtain a loan in the U.S. With a collateral of their properties because they don't want to spend their money in the U.S. So they have to procure capital or get capital from the banks in the U.S. and it is being collateralized by their properties. No? So petitioners support their argument by pointing out that the 12.5 to 15% royalty rates made it difficult for petitioner to finance their planned expansion. No? So they are paying 12.5% to 15% royalty rates for the use of the name medieval times and also the processes and the management, no? And that the financing allowed them to control the royalty payments during the expansion period. Petitioners further attempt to support their argument that there was economic substance to the transactions. May economic substance daw yung transactions nila. That's why it should not be disallowed. That the basis that Manver gave up the right to substantial pay-as-you-go royalties for several years and instead received cash and promissory notes. No? Kasi ano yun, give up niya yung substantial pay-as-you-go royalties. Ano yung kinuha niya? Cash and promissory notes. No? Siguro because sa cash and promissory notes, sa promissory notes, there is still payment of interest. No? So with respect to the guarantee fees, petitioner argue that because the guarantee fees paid on the commercial paper did not exceed the amounts that would be charged by an unrelated party, those fees were reasonable. No? Hindi naman sumobra kaysa dun sa unrelated parties. Were reasonable for purposes of Section 162A and consistent with arm's length amounts for purposes of Section 482. Ano itong Section 482 ng US Tax Code? This Section 482 refers to the power of the commissioner to make allocation, distribute, or apportion income and capital in order to defeat the evasion of taxes. No? So, with respect to the guarantee fees, petitioners, ito na, respondent contends that there was no genuine indebtedness. No? Ano sabi ng respondent? Sino yung respondent dito? The Commissioner of Internal Revenue. No? Kasi ang sabi ng medieval times o yung Manver dito, siya yung may-ari. No? Yung sabi ng Manver, may substance daw yung gawa nila. And then, in accordance with the arm's length principle, no? So yun ang mga allegations ni Manver. No, ano naman ang sabi ng petitioner or the Commissioner of Internal Revenue? With respect to the guarantee fees, petitioners argue that because the guarantee fees paid on the commercial paper did not exceed the amount that would be charged by an unrelated party, those fees are reasonable for purposes of Section 162A and consistent with the arm's length amounts for purposes of Section 482. So respondent contends that there was no genuine indebtedness underlying the interest payment as required by Section 163, and therefore, the transactions were sham. No? So yun naman ang contention ng Commissioner of Internal Revenue that the transaction is sham, or there is really no transactions. No? Respondent asserts that the transactions lack economic substance. Sabi nung medieval times, may economic substance. Sabi naman ng IRS, no economic substance, and were entered into solely for tax avoidance purposes. At ano lang yung reason? Solely for tax avoidance purposes. If you try to look at or read the deliberations during the trial, talagang pinag-isipan nila lahat ng mga ginawa by registering so many corporations, no, and then complicate the structures in order to avoid payment of taxes. No? So tax avoidance purposes. Respondent further contends that there was no economic substance to the guarantee fees. So sabi na naman ng IRS, walang economic substance to the guarantee fees because there was no bona fide debt. Bakit walang economic substance ang guarantee fee? Kasi wala namang utang, no? So, there was no bona fide debt to guarantee. Wala naman dapat garantiyahan, no? And because the guarantor controlled the ability of petitioners to repay the debt and the ability of the creditor to enforce the debt and the guarantee, no? So, pareho lang control transactions. So, for interest to be deductible under Section 163A, it must be paid on genuine indebtedness. No? Para maging deductible siya, dapat naman siya sa genuine or talagang totoong utang. And indebtedness in substance and not merely in form. No? So, utang talaga siya in substance, hindi lang in form na tinawag mo lang na utang, pero hindi naman totoong utang. Nets versus United States. Transactions that lack economic substance and are conducted for the sole purpose of reducing tax liability are disregarded as sham by the court. No? So, sino nagtawag sa kanila na sham? Yung court. No? Nets versus United States. Sopra Sabiano versus Commissioner. Sopra Falsity versus Commissioner. Sopra in Frank Lion Company versus United States. Okay. Excuse me. Mainit na tea. No? Pampainit sa lalamunan. Okay. There is a genuine multi-party transactions with economic substance which is compelled or encouraged by business or regulatory realities. Is imbued with tax-independent considerations and is not shaped solely by tax avoidance features that have meaningless labels attached. The government should honor the allocation of rights and duties effectuated by the parties. This court has articulated a definition of sham in substance, no? As the expedient of drawing up papers to characterize transactions contrary to objectives, economic realities, and which have no economic significance beyond expected tax benefits. No? So, ang expected tax benefits lang ang pakinabang ng mga sham in substance, no? Sham in substance. Ibig sabihin, walang substance na mga transactions. Falsity versus Commissioner Sopra 347, see also Rise Toyota World Inc. versus Commissioner, no? So in Falsity versus Commissioner, we considered the totality of the facts and circumstances and determined that the purported purchase of certain real property was a sham because of the absence of transfer of legal title or other indicia of arm's length dealings. drastically inflated sales prices, and complete disregard of contractual terms. In these cases, we have considered the entire record and conclude that the financing arrangement for the royalty payments to Manver lacked economic substance and were shams, entered into solely for tax avoidance purposes. This conclusion is based on many factors, including the lack of arm's length dealings, circular money movements. Imagine na, ito yung mga ginagawa nila, ha? Lack of arm's length dealings. So, ibig sabihin, yun yung hinahanap ng transfer pricing, no? Yung arm's length dealings or yung pricing of goods and services between related parties at par with that of the independent parties. And then circular money movements, ikot-ikot lang yung pera sa kanila. And other questionable business practices, no? So, questionable yung business practices nila kasi paggawa ng maraming companies to complicate the structures. No? And what is the purpose, the ultimate purpose? To reduce payment of taxes or not to pay taxes at all. Okay. The Spanish investors controlled every entity. Sila talaga sila nagpatayo involved in the transactions. They controlled the companies that were the source of the payments, the companies that were to receive the payments, and the companies through which the payments passed as part of the commercial paper and other transactions. Sige, kahit sino na mga related parties in the transactions, controlled nila because sila may gawa no? Petitioners argue that the transaction had economic substance because it was difficult to finance petitioners' planned corporate expansion and pay royalties of 12.5 to 15% to Manver simultaneously. Napakalaki ng binabayad sa royalties. No? So, petitioners' argument, bakit mahal? Napakalaki ng payment to royalties. Kasi sila lang din yung nagdedetermine at saka related parties lang din yung binabayaran. No? So petitioner's argument is unpersuasive for several reasons. As we concluded earlier, Manver did not own the rights to the intangibles. So there was no reason for MSI and MDT to pay royalties to Manver. No? So yun ang contention nila. No? Hindi naman si Manver, no? Ang nagbabayad dito na royalties. Pay royalties to Manver. Itong si MSI at saka si MDT, no? Ito yung mga related parties or mga companies, no? Within the group. The heavy burden imposed by the alleged royalties simply cast further doubt on whether the rates were reasonable. Kaya, so yung rate, tama ba? Reasonable ba? In fact, because Manver, MSI, and MDT were all controlled by the same individuals, the alleged financial hardship was self-imposed and could easily have been remedied by reducing the royalty rates. No? So, tinataasan mo yung royalty rates, 12.5 to 15%, tinataasan mo yung expenses. No? The record is replete with additions, alterations, and revisions to agreements. Petitioners included in the lump sum amounts royalty payments of 5.85 million for a second California castle and a New Jersey castle, neither of which was built yet. Nitong time na to. Pero ngayon, nandyan na yan. The second California castle never opened. There is neither credible evidence nor reason to believe that an unrelated party would have been willing to pay 5.85 million in advance for royalty payments on speculation as to possible future need for the intangibles. Kasi bakit nagbayad na daw ng advance for royalty payment na hindi pa naman sigurado, no? But ang nagbayad na yun is unrelated party, no? So petitioner's position is further weakened by the amendments to the MSI, MDT, and Manver royalty agreements that provided for payments in excess of the lump sum amounts if either MDTs or MSI gross sales exceeded certain base amounts. So yun ang condition. The amendments provided that MSI and MDT were to pay Manware 15% of their gross sales that were in excess of the base amounts. Okay. So an agreement to pay additional royalties in excess of the lump sum amount is inconsistent with the claim that the original lump sum amount created such hardship to petitioners' expansion plans. It appears more likely that it was just another avenue for the Spanish investors to receive corporate distributions. Petitioners also argue that there was economic substance to the transactions because Manware grew up the right to substantial pay-as-you-go royalties for several years and instead received cash and promissory notes. So petitioners point out that Manware agreed to accept a lesser sum. Si Manware nag-accept ng lesser sum in exchange for receiving the payments upfront. The difference in the amount was determined by petitioner at the time of the transactions and represented the discount on the total payments. So, yan na po yung the circular transfer of money through related parties to create the illusion of payment is an indication of sham transactions. No? So, bakit? Circular transfer of money, no, through related parties. Tapos to create the illusion of payment. No? So it is an indication of sham transactions. Okay. So in the instant cases, Carmi versus Commissioner, enormous circular money movements between entities controlled by the Spanish investors occurred approximately every 183 days so that the interest on the payments would qualify for the exemptions on withholding tax. No? So yun din yung ina-after nila para sometimes may 0% yung rate ng mga income tax sa ibang bansa. No? Okay. So ano naman tong circular transfer of money? The circular transfer of money through related parties to create the illusion of payment is an indication of sham transactions. So sham transactions na naman. So in the instant cases, enormous circular money movements between entities controlled by the Spanish investors occurred approximately every 183 days so that the interest on the payments would qualify for the exemption on withholding tax. No? So may mga requirement para maka-avail siya ng exemption sa withholding tax. So in Munana versus Commissioner, without published opinion, we found that the taxpayer's transaction lacked economic substance and stated. So, ito yung mga contention ng Okay. Okay, so the various transfers among entities controlled or owned by the taxpayer are reminiscent of those with which we have previously dealt. No? So ito yung Carmi versus Commissioner. In those cases, the taxpayers used foreign and domestic entities to make pre-arranged money movements. So within the system of entities, Carmi versus Commissioner, the funds involved in those money movements never left the system of controlled entities. Typical of the transactions in those cases were K documents that were not executed and sometimes not even written in final form until long after their purported dates. Okay. So, bakit sila nag-avoid ng payment of withholding? Because nagpapa-exempt sila, ayaw nila magbayad ng income tax, no? So, to avoid withholding on the interest on the 12.5 million, in notes to Manver, a round of commercial paper was issued, no? So, nag-issue sila ng commercial paper. During March 1988, Manver transferred 9.03 million to Gate Town. The funds were through a myriad of controlled entities within a day or two, unended within MDTs, transferring 7.672 million to Manver as payment on the royalties. No? Okay. Manver then transferred 2.672 million to Gate Town. Okay. Which then transferred the money through a series of controlled entities, eventually to have 3.354 million transferred back to Gate Town, which transferred it to MSI, which in turn transferred it to Manver. So, petitioners effectively used 7.672 million of funds supplied by Manver to reduce debt to Manver by 11 million. Imagine, no? Okay. So, as subsequent rounds of commercial paper were issued, the interest payments that were made to the controlled entities were then distributed to the Spanish investors, no? Eurotour companies. The use of the commercial paper not only provides an opportunity to avoid withholding on their interest, it also provided for the Spanish investors to receive corporate distribution tax-free. No? So since may mga distributions, they also wanted it to be tax-free. No? Why tax-free? Kasi napaka-burdensome po ng tax. No? Imagine yung rate lang ng income tax is 30%. No? So we examined similar facts in Erchard versus Commissioner. Okay. Where we concluded, moreover, the records clearly shows that the money movements technique, paikot-ikot lang, made possible a group of transactions with a total value for in excess of the actual cash involved. So the circular money movements here involved generally began and ended with system entities, with no change in the economic position of the system viewed as a whole. And then quite often, the money movements occurred in a single day. The stream of money flowing through the intermediate entities, supported by mere bookkeeping entries or by the devices of back-to-back loans, was without economic substance. No? See Carmi versus Commissioner. Okay. Okay. Excuse lang. Pait yung aking... Okay. May shoutout pare. Sige. Shoutout muna.
Shoutout po kay Ma'am Rowela Caballero.
Okay.
Then kay Sir Ryan Diocades.
Wow.
Good
Okay.
evening daw po.
Sige.
Shoutout din po kay Miss Cupcake.
Thank you po.
Kay Ma'am Lilian Yao.
Thank you din po.
And then kay Sir Eugene Cruz. Good evening.
Thank you din, Sir Eugene.
Good evening din daw po sabi ni Christine Joy Tenepere.
Okay.
And kay Ma'am Joanna Marie Muulik from Pangasinan.
Okay.
Sila pa lang, ma'am.
Okay, so for our viewers, no, we have our transfer pricing audit sub 15 and 16. Ayan, no. We have already posted the topics and we have already make the link for the invitations, no. So you may join and still the same with our mga webinars noon, magbibigay din tayo ng certificate, no. But that is 2 days transfer pricing audit. Every month gagawin na po natin yan, puro updates. Anyway, mga bago yan that we have to understand about hindi man siya directly transfer pricing, but really all are related to transfer pricing. Okay. Wala na? Okay. So you are invited for the free webinar on transfer pricing updates on February, July, ano ngayon? 15 and 16, no? For July. 15 and 16, no? July na ngayon, August na lang, isang buwan na lang. No? After that, bear na. No? Okay. Sana matapos na rin yung pandemic. No? Tsaka sana nagpa-vaccine na lahat. No? Pero yung vaccine dito ngayon, ano daw sila na-move daw yung mga schedule, hari. Kaya tingnan mo. No, kinulang sa vaccine. Okay. So, sige. Sa mga probinsya nga, wala pa eh. Mga frontliner lang ang na-vaccine, pero yung mga tao talaga wala pa. Okay. So, petitioners attempt to distinguish the instant cases from the other circular money movement cases. They argue that in the instant cases, there is real value underlying the lump sum royalty payments. So, hindi nila inano yung circular money movement, no? Hindi raw, yung kanila daw may substance, no? So, petitioners contend that the real value consisted of the right to use the pay's valuable intangibles for an extended period. So, as we concluded earlier, Manver did not own or transfer the intangibles, and therefore petitioners could have used the intangibles without paying Manver. No? So, is it arm's length? Siyempre, hindi. Okay, so petitioners have failed to persuade that we should treat their circular money movement as anything other than shams. No? So, hindi naman na maipakita ng medieval times na hindi sham yung kanilang money movement. So additionally, petitioners have failed to persuade us that the transactions were entered into for reasons other than tax avoidance. No? So hindi nila na-convince yung court na hindi tax avoidance yung kanilang ginagawa. Petitioners admit on brief that had they been informed that the Netherlands Antilles Treaty exemption for interest would not expire on January 1, 1988, they would have simply signed the notes to Manver, no? Paid interest thereon until the notes were paid off, and completely avoided the commercial paper headaches. No? So, sumakit yung ulo nila. Santandrur testified that the reason the commercial paper was issued was to have the advantages of not paying the withholding on the interest. So, inamin din nila, no? Na ang advantages nila, not paying withholding on the interest. Both of these explanations support the conclusion that the transactions were entered into solely for tax avoidance purposes. So, yun yung nangyari po dito sa case, no? The prosecution or the court was able to prove na solely for tax reason talaga yung nangyari, kaya ginawa nila yung mga transactions. Petitioners deducted the guarantee fees as an ordinary and necessary business expense under Section 162. Petitioners rely on AE and EB Jones Company versus Commissioner and argue that because the amount of the guarantee fees did not exceed amounts that would have been charged to an unrelated party, the fees were reasonable for purposes of Section 162A. In that case, surely companies would not issue bonds to cover corporate contracts without the personal guarantees of the Jones brothers. No? While we look at the reasonableness of the guarantee fees, there was no issue as to whether the guarantee fees were ordinary and necessary. Bakit kailangan ordinary and necessary? Because that's the prerequisite for you to claim expenses. No, it should be necessary and ordinary in the conduct of your business. Okay. Interest deductions on Section 351, di ba yun yung dalawa yung ating didiscuss. Yun yung mga payment ng uh, interest at saka guarantee fees na sobra-sobra. No? So, interest deductions on the Section 35 transactions. Petitioners deducted interest payments on the promissory notes given in exchange for assets in the Section 351 transactions. No? So, petitioner argued that the Section 351 transactions established an unconditional obligation to pay and that the promissory notes were valid debt notwithstanding the year-long delay in finalizing the notes. No? Okay. So, ano naman sabi ni respondent or ng BIR? Respondent contends that the amounts in issue should be treated as equity because petitioners lack the intent and ability to repay the funds and therefore the funds were at the risk of the business. No? Okay. So the classic debt is an unqualified obligation to pay a sum certain at a reasonable close fixed maturity date along with a fixed percentage in interest payable regardless of the debtor's income or lack thereof. Okay. Sige. So, yun na yung sa interest natin, no? So, kailan nagiging siyam yung interest payment? So, wala siyang economic substance. Okay. So, in New Jersey and California, expansion expenses. Petitioners deducted expenses incurred with the development of new castles in California and New Jersey. Okay. Petitioners argue that these amounts were expended for their own benefit and account in the expansion of their existing business to new locations. Respondent is allowed the deductions on the basis that the expenses did not belong to MDT but were startup expenses of separate entities. So, sino yung startup? GCI is DCI and MCI. Petitioners agree that the subsidiaries were separate legal entities, but argue that the issue is whether the expansion was carried out by GCI, SDCI, and MCI or by petitioner. Okay. Okay. Addition to tax and penalties for fraud and negligence, no? So, yun ang matindi. May penalties talaga ang fraud and negligence. Paano ba nangyari yung fraud? Paano nangyari yung negligence? Fraud. Respondent determined that some of the practitioners are subject to additions to tax and penalties for fraud and in the alternative negligence. No? So, negligence is punishable. So, the addition to tax in the case of fraud is a civil sanction provided primarily as a safeguard for the protection of the revenue and reimburse the government for the heavy expense of investigation and the loss resulting from the taxpayers' fraud. Okay. Paano pinaparusahan yung mga tao na may mga fraudulent transactions? No? They are they are criminally liable, no? So pwede silang kasuhan. Just like here in the Philippines, ano ba yung ginagawa sa mga fraudulent cases natin? Pinafile po yan sa DOJ o sa Department of Justice. And if the Department of Justice will be convinced that there is a reasonable reason na talagang nangyari yun, may probable cause, then the case will be filed in the regional regular court or the regional trial court. No? Okay. So respondent or the IRS in this case cites numerous badges of fraud such as the creation and backdating of documents. So yun yung backdating ng documents, no? False statements in documents, the use of nominees, and the failure to disclose related party information to the IRS. No? So the facts indicate, and we have concluded in previous portions of this opinion that petitioners backdated and created document, put false information in documents, used nominees to sign documents, and presented the false documents to the IRS. So dami nilang ginawang fraud, no? However, the presence of badges of fraud will not automatically negate an alternative explanation for petitioner's actions. No? Kasi ang court naman, ano lang yan eh, very conservative lang din yan. No? In favor din yan siya sa taxpayer. Okay. So petitioners here argue that they are not liable for additions to tax and penalties for fraud or negligence. Siyempre, hindi nila aaminin because they reasonably and in good faith follow the advice of C&L and other. Kasi they just follow the advice of their accountants and lawyers. No? That's why ngayon, yung latest na initiative ng OECD is to crack down professionals enablers, no? Ang tawag sa kanila professional enablers of the taxpayers to evade the taxes, no? Payment of taxes. Okay. So in their brief, petitioners state that they had no reason to believe that the advice they received was incorrect, nor did they have the knowledge or experience to second guess that advice, no? So, respondent argues that petitioners were sophisticated businessmen who were able to function in a highly competitive environment. So, magagaling talaga. No? Yung mga Spanish businessmen na founder ng medieval times, magagaling talaga sila. And therefore, they cannot claim reliance on their advisors, particularly if petitioners fail to prove the advisors with the correct and complete information. Okay. So additionally, respondent points out that petitioners did not always follow the advice of their advisors, no? Okay, so hindi rin sinusunod yung advisors nila. No, yan ang problema din dito sa Pilipinas kasi sabi ng mga consultants, kukuha ng consultants, pag nandyan na, hindi naman susundin yung advice ng consultant. In all their business planning, petitioners had as a goal reducing their taxes. No? Tax reduction is an acceptable goal as long as the reduction involves transaction with substance and is by a legal means. No? Basta may substance lang. C&L offered tax planning that would reduce petitioners' taxes. No? So, may tax planning sila na offer. Throughout C&L engagement with petitioners, C&L suggested various organizational changes and structures that would reduce petitioners' taxes. The badges of fraud occurred after C&L suggested a new organizational structure or change for petitioners. So, nag-change na naman, no? So C&L suggested that petitioners' organization was a franchise and backdated documents appeared, specifically the January 20 and February 1, 1983 agreements. Those 1983 agreements attempted to substantiate franchise arrangement and contained the same language that was in the tax planning letter than C&L sent to petitioners in 1986. Okay. So, yun yung mga argument nila, no? Sana tayo, dito na tayo sa negligence. Kasi ang sinacharge sa kanila is fraud and negligence. No, ano ba itong negligence? So, negligence, Section 6653A1 imposes an addition to tax in an amount equal to 5% of the underpayment if any part of the underpayment is due to negligence or disregard of rules or regulations. Section 6653A1 applies to tax returns with a due date prior to December 31, 1989. Okay. The section was repealed December 31, 1989 and codified in Section 6662. No? Okay. So negligence is defined as the lack of due care or failure to do what a reasonable and ordinary prudent person would do under the circumstances. No? Okay. So negligence also includes any failure to make a reasonable attempt to comply with the provisions of the Internal Revenue laws or to exercise ordinary and reasonable care in the preparation of a tax return. Okay. So petitioners argue that they should not be liable for the negligence penalties because they relied on their advisors. No? Petitioner states that the reliance was reasonable given practitioners' language problems. No? So, kasi hindi magkaintindihan. Lack of U.S. business experience and total unfamiliarity with U.S. tax laws. Okay. So, respondent, sino yung respondent ito? The Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Respondent contends that petitioners disregarded rules or regulations and were negligent when they created false and backdated documents. Submitted false information on their tax returns and to the IRS during audit. Okay. So anong sabi dito? Respondent failed to prove by clear and convincing evidence that petitioners claim and reliance of C&L was fictitious. No? So yun ang sabi nila. However, for reliance to be a defense to negligence, petitioners must prove that the reliance was reasonable. Petitioners cannot claim reliance on their advisors' advice if they fail to follow it. No? Okay. So may mga ayaw talaga mag-concede no nung medieval times, no? Substantial understatement and increased interest, no? Okay. Increased interest. Withholding tax at the source. Okay. Withholding of tax on foreign corporation. Okay. So respondent determined that petitioners were liable for withholding tax on the deficiencies related to. Okay, so A, interest MDT and MSI paid to ABV and MTBV respectively. Franchise fees that MANV paid to Manver in the fiscal year ended November 30, 1987. No? So amounts that MDT and MSI paid to Manver in March 1988. Amounts that MANV, MSI, MDT paid to Eurotor as management and consultancy fees. No? So, ang dami pang findings. Guarantee fees that MDT and MSI paid to DAPI and runabout in connection with the commercial paper transactions. Also, ang dami nilang issues, no? Interest that MDT and MSI paid to the commercial papers holders, and fees that must be paid to Santandrew and Sige in the fiscal year ended November 30, 1987. Okay. Okay, so yun yung mga year covered, no? 1988 to 1989, and then yung yearly, no? Okay. 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 Ito pa ang isa ng binabato din sa kanila na violations din nila, no? Yung failure to deposit withholding tax, no? Dito sa atin, that is estafa, that is criminally liable, no? So, yung failure to deposit withholding tax. Respondent contends that petitioners are liable for penalty under Section 6656 because they failed to withhold unperiodically deposits withholding of tax. Hindi sila nagbayad ng tax regularly. Respondent asserts that the penalty applies to the extent that the court concludes that the MDT payments to various foreign entities and individuals were subject to the 30% withholding under Section 1442. Failure to make deposit of taxes or overstatement of deposits. Okay. So ito yung mga underpayment of deposits, no? Okay. So in this case, the petitioners rely on Revenue Ruling 75-1-91 to support their position that the penalty is not applicable. Doon sa mga ginawa nila, hindi raw applicable ang penalties, no? Petitioners' reliance is misplaced because Revenue Ruling 75-191 addresses employee and employee federal insurance contributions act and income taxes, which are now in issue. Petitioners argue further that the fact and law were sufficiently doubtful that there was reasonable cause for MDT's failure to withhold, and MDT relied on the advice of C&L. Okay. So, the facts and law were not sufficiently doubtful as to petitioners' obligation to withhold. Petitioners misrepresented the facts and circumstances, the rules and regulations, and the advice of CL Florida office. The preponderance of the evidence supports the conclusion that petitioners' failure to withhold and deposit was not due to reasonable cause. No? So, respondents' determination as to this issue is sustained. No? Okay. So, panalo ang Commissioner of Internal Revenue as against the medieval attractions NV. No? May ano pa? Shout out? Sige, shout out muna.
Shout out po kay Alejandro Valdez Jr.
Okay.
Kay Ma'am Kay Ann Ferrer.
Okay.
And kay Sir Jericho Ferrer. Good evening daw po.
Okay. Ilan yung viewers natin?
9 po.
Okay, so with that po, I say thank you very much. At for the case, itong si Medieval Times, tingnan po ninyo sa internet. At ma-appreciate nyo gaano kaganda yung kanilang dinner theater shows, no? Na actual talaga nag-aaway yung makikita mo lang sa sine. Hindi mo nga ma-imagine na meron pala, no? So napakaganda po ng kanilang mga shows and kahit saan sila magpunta, ang dami nilang customers, no? So with that, I would like to say thank you very much sa ating mga viewers and please attend the transfer pricing updates, no, on July 15 and 16. This coming Thursday and Friday na po. Padadalan yung mga mag ano na, may link na hari.
Meron na po.
Padalhan na lang sila ng advanced na PowerPoint, no? So, pero mga Wednesday kami makapagpadala sa inyo, inaayos lang ngayon. And then, meron pa tayo iba yung accredited tax agent sa February 27 to August 2 kasi medyo na change natin yung address because of the PRC approval. But then, tuloy lang po natin. And yung sa tax preparer natin. Pero tingnan natin kung ano kasi parang duplication na lang din siya sa bookkeeper. So tingnan natin kung ituloy natin. And then, monthly na itong ating transfer pricing audit, transfer pricing updates, no? So, every month, meron tayong 2 days for the transfer pricing audit. But during the live streaming naman, marami tayong will discuss cases as to the application of this transfer pricing or the arm's length principle. So, with that, I would like to say thank you very much. May pahabol pa?
Wala na po.
So, I would like to say thank you very much and let's call it a night.